Just one moment, Mrs. Taylor. I'm having to refresh because my vote didn't come up. Oh, there it went. Okay, well, all right. All right. So the motion passed at 3-0. We have a technical difficulty and lost Mrs. Ordway. We will try to reconnect with her. We will now move on to our district reports, and our first report is the finance report. Mrs. Mock.
Good evening, President O'Brien, members of the board, and guests. This evening, we are proud to present the final finance reports for the 21-22 school year. We will return with these reports in the fall, but for the month ending May and the next to last day of school, our enrollment remained up from the year prior of 1.5%, still seeing a 3.5 decrease from the 2018-2019 year, and that is still in line with state averages for enrollment as well, with the state seeing an increase in brick and mortar enrollment and still a decrease overall from the last pre-COVID year. With that, I will take any questions on the 21-22 enrollment report.
Thank you, Mrs. Mock. Any questions, board members? Okay, no questions on that report. Mrs. Mock, please continue.
Thank you, President O'Brien. Our second report for the evening is the M&O budget report for the month ending May of 2022. We did see a slight increase in our projected carry forward to just about $22 million total. This projected carry forward does include our May budget revision that was approved at a prior board meeting. And unfortunately, I think we've got two things working for us for this carry forward. One of them is our increase in students this year that we just talked about, that 1.5%. Another is the unfilled vacancies that we had for the school year as well. We did see a deep increase, or a significant increase, I should say, in our department budgets. I want to point that out specifically. That is a majority due to our transportation department. Part of that is the increase in fuel costs that we've seen over the past few months, but we also found an error in the report that we generate for this specific report, and so not all of their expenses were being pulled in. We probably should have shown that transportation budget due to contracted staffing, or contracted pupil transportation, and fuel costs and other increased costs. We should have seen that as a potential negative earlier. Now, part of that is offset. If you look at the transportation staffing line, we are projecting a carry forward in the transportation staffing line. So some of what we're seeing in that contracted people transportation or charter transportation is offset by their vacancies as well. Same as what we see in the certified remaining budget balance line and potential over, or the nearly zeroed out expenditures for our subline. It's very difficult to look at the report and look at you this way. I think probably one of these days I should turn my laptop around. It would help. But with all of those items considered, we are projecting that 22 million carry forward. It's a bit of an anomaly year, as we remember part of that, or 7.5 million of that, was unbudgeted monies that we saved for any unknown events occurring in this present school year. With that, I will take any questions on the M&O budget report.
Any questions, board members? Okay, Mrs. Ordway, do you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and you have one more report?
We do have our final student reports with our finance reports for the school year. And the first being the Student Activities Fund report with an overall balance of $2.48 million at the end of May. And our auxiliary funds having a balance of about 2.0506 for the month ending in May. As a reminder, student activities are all of our club funds. Those are funds raised by our students, and our students get to determine where those funds are spent. for their club, their activities, and their campuses. The auxiliary funds include items such as our parking athletic participation fee. Those specifically are used to offset our M&O for staffing that we allocate directly to the campuses that raise those funds. Others in parking, a portion of the parking also stays at the school. Lost ID funds, some of their CTE funds for the school stores, items like that are what are in the auxiliary funds, as well as our athletic ticket sales and athletic passes. And with that, I'll take any questions on the student activities or the auxiliary reports.
Any questions, board members? All right.
Nope.
You have done an excellent job, Mrs. Mock. Thank you for those reports. All right. And now we will have our second district report, which is the grading and reporting in Deer Valley Unified School District, Part 1. And for that, we will go to Dr. Galligan.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and community members, tonight we present information about grading and reporting in Deer Valley. The presentation this evening will be delivered by teachers Karen Beeman and Tate Moline, campus administrators Dr. Lynn Miller, Dr. Anita Stulk, and Bobby Serro, and district personnel, which will include Kathy White and myself. The presentation will be presented in two parts. The first part presented tonight will cover DVUSD's journey in updating and reforming grading practices, the purpose or the why behind the need for changes, the goals and the solutions implemented, and the connection between professional learning communities, or PLCs, learning standards, multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, and grading. That would be this week, this meeting. At the next governing board meeting on June 28th, we will talk about the preparations for grading changes that have been employed, the logistical pieces around grading reporting, communication, internal and external plans, and next steps. We're going to take just a few moments to talk about our journey toward grading reform.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and community members. 5+ years ago, a groundswell of interest from parents and teachers in grading practices, concern over the lack of consistency, and concern over minimally established grading practice expectations began to grow. To address these concerns, a large stakeholder group was formed to evaluate current practices and gather input on where revisions should be explored. The committee of around 100 people included teachers from every grade level and every department, K-12 administrators, support staff, district personnel, and parents. The team created a guiding principle for what grading in our district should represent and identified some areas to examine. The work of the stakeholder team kicked off with a grading expert to help the team get their heads around what grading even really meant and to go through what the current research has found about grading and what is important on the topic. The team then came up with a guiding principle about what grading meant in Deer Valley. They carefully and thoughtfully devoted a great deal of time working on the guiding principle in order to give direction to any decisions the team would make. The guiding principle created was authentic grading accurately measures and reflects a student's performance based upon mastery of the standards. Over many meetings, the committee determined whether we needed to make any changes. The stakeholder group concluded that two areas needed to be addressed. The areas they identified were removing behavior from grading in order to improve accuracy in academic reporting and change the grade scale in order to address the issue of 0 to 100% scale, improve consistency, and communicate proficiency of learning standards. After looking at many grading scales that are used in schools, the K-6 group decided upon a 4-1 grade scale, while the 7-12 group chose the 4-0 grade scale. A timeline for implementation of grading changes was then developed. The original rollout plan called for a school to pilot the changes in the 2020-2021 school year, with all schools implementing the new grade scales and removing non-academic factors from grades by the 2021-2022 school year. Due to the disruption caused by virtual learning at the end of the 1920 school year and during the 2020-2021 school year, the first phase was delayed until the 21-22 school year, whereby all schools would implement the removal of non-academic factors from grading, and 9 schools would also implement the new grade scales. Another timeline adjustment was made this school year by adding a third phase to the rollout plan, meaning full implementation will not take place until the 2023-2024 school year. Extending the timeline for full implementation by 3 years was warranted due to the pandemic. However, further extension poses a risk to losing the momentum of the work and getting to a place where we all have unified practices district-wide. Several teams have expended a great deal of effort and time to tackle this important work. The teams working on grading reform include the K-6 grade band team, the 7-12 grade band team, the Grading and Reporting Steering Committee, the Promotion, Retention, Acceleration Grading Guide team, the Grading, Reporting, and Graduation Guide team, and the newly formed Gradebook Design team. This school year, all schools are implementing the removal of behavioral components from academic grades. Additionally, this year, 9 schools moved forward with the new grade scales. The work this year was heavily focused on supporting the 9 Phase 1 schools. The teachers at these schools have been creative and solution-minded, helping to design procedures and practices that have helped the district in determining best practices for schools that follow. Next year, 7 more schools will join the Phase 1 schools in implementing the new grade scales. Letters will be sent to the parents with additional information at the beginning of the school year, and teachers will provide class-specific information at that time as well. The Promotion, Retention, Acceleration, and Grading, or PRAG, documents were updated to reflect the revised grading procedures, and a new document for high school educators was created called the Grading, Reporting, and Graduation, or GRAG Guide. These guides are revised annually, and the latest versions for the 22-23 school year will be posted in July. These guides can be found on the district website. Parents are encouraged to visit the district website grading page at dvusd.org/grading, or by going to dvusd.org, clicking on the Parent and Student tab, and then clicking on the Grading and Reporting link. From that page, parents can select the FAQ from the menu on the left.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. So why change grading practices? After all, if it's not broke, why fix it? The problem is that the traditional grading system is broken, and we are indebted to find ways to be better. Including non-academic elements when reporting academic progress distorts the data. Using grades to penalize or reward behavior, misreporting academic performance by capping or reducing grades, and giving grades for actions that are not related to learning contorts the accuracy of the grade. When elements other than the academic performance are mixed with academic performance, the grade is muddied. It becomes unclear whether a student is performing well or struggling academically. So let's look at an example. Here are 2 students who both earned a B in a course. Are both students proficient in the subject area? With these grades, it would be assumed that both students are proficient and in good shape to move on to the next level. But let's look a little more closely. Here are the scores Student 1 scored on coursework, participation, effort, and behavioral components. These scores average to an 80, or a B. But if we look at the entries that were related to the student's academic performance, we can see that the scores average a D level. Here, when looking at the scores that are related to academic performance, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Which page am I on? Here are students' 2 scores, which also average to an 80. When looking at the scores that are related to academic performance, the student averages at a 96% level. If the non-academic elements are removed, the student's grade would not be at the B level. One student would be a D and the other an A. Student 2 is far more proficient with the academic material, and student 1 is in need of academic support and intervention. Including the behavioral elements clearly distorted the grades.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests, removing behavioral and conduct indicators from academic reporting does not mean behavior is not highly important in the development of a child, but grades should not be used as a method of coercion for compliant behavior. Behavior should be dealt with via consequences and are rewarded in other ways and reported separately from academics. Reporting academics separately from behavior provides much clearer information for parents, students, and educators. Rather than mixing these components together, keeping these components separated improves the accuracy of the data. There are also problems with the traditional 0 to 100% grade scale. There are 41 levels that are at a passing level, and however, there are 60 levels that are failing, making the scale skewed. A bigger problem with traditional 0 to 100% grade scale is a power of 0. A grade of 0 carries 6 times the weight of the other grades. A 0 is a grade crusher. For example, a student with 3 90% grades who receives 1 0 would now have a D. The student would need to earn 9 perfect scores just to get back to the A level. For the student earning a C with 3 grade entries, 1 0 would result in a failing grade, requiring more than 5 perfect scores to return to a C level. Another problem with traditional 0 to 100% grade scale is that there are 101 levels, which makes consistency and reliability an issue. For example, it would not be unusual for 3 teachers to come up varying scores on an assignment with 101 levels available to be assigned. Yet, most likely, in this example, for instance, all these teachers would consider the assessment of the proficient levels, so all of the teachers would issue the same score. Fewer indicators leads to more consistency. To combat these issues with accuracy and the grade scale, teams of educators have been working on solutions, focusing their work on some key goals. The goals are to ensure that grades are based on student achievement, knowledge, skill proficiency, and are separate from behaviors. Promote consistency in grading across teams, departments, and schools, and provide parents and students with ongoing, credible, and useful feedback that conveys expectations and achievement of identified standards of knowledge included in the curriculum.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. For more than 2 decades, we've been teaching to identified standards of learning. It only makes sense that we report on the learning of these standards. Grading based on standards provides the information parents, students, and educators need to evaluate a certain student's learning progress. To improve grading accuracy, deductions for late work will not be applied as long as the student has met the for submitting late work. Students do not have unlimited time to submit work. Schools have specified procedures. These vary from school to school due to what makes sense for the school community based on the developmental level of the students, social capital of the community, among other factors. Similarly, there are no deductions for reassessments. If the student has met the school's procedures, students may be given the opportunity to retake a test. Another way teachers can reassess is through a future assessment of the standards. The most important thing is to try to get an accurate evaluation of the student's. Cheating is a very serious behavior problem. Students who plagiarize or cheat will face disciplinary consequences and will be required to resubmit the work. Rather than using grades as leverage to coerce compliant behavior, misbehavior will be responded to with discipline consequences and behavioral interventions. Additionally, students who do not complete coursework will receive consequences and intervention. Teachers and schools will respond to students based upon whether a student's lack of compliance is due to not being able to do the work or unwilling to do the work, as well as the issue if the issue is infrequent or chronic. To address the problems with the 0 to 100% scale, 4 key factors were important to the teams to consider in adopting a new grade scale. First, the range between the levels of the scale needed to be equal to prevent the skewing of the grade. Next, fewer levels were necessary to lead to increased consistency. Each of the levels of the grade scale needed to be based upon a level of academic proficiency. And finally, each level of the scale needed to describe a level of learning rather than using a calculation scheme or point harvesting. The new grade scale meets these criteria. The range between each level is equal to prevent overly weighting one level over another. Instead of 101 levels, there are 4 or 5, which increases consistency. Each level represents a level of proficiency of learning rather than an accumulation of points. And each level has a descriptor to designate the learning expectation. To clear up some confusion that's out there, neither scale describes the 4 level as above and beyond. or above grade level, or perfection. The 4 level indicates that a student has demonstrated a high level of proficiency. This may be shown by being able to apply greater depth to their thinking, navigate increased complexity, perform more consistency at greater rates, transfer knowledge to other situations, etc. All teachers should teach to the 4, and a 4 should be attainable. In the old system, where the focus was on how many points a student could earn, discussions around grades became about how I can get more points. The goal is to move toward a system where discussions are focused on the learning, where students ask how they can demonstrate mastery of the learning standards, and the focus becomes about learning, not about earning. The changes in grading practices are not designed to make earning good grades more difficult or easier to obtain. The goal is to improve accuracy, consistency, and authenticity. If students relied upon compliant behavior to inflate their grades, then they may see a dip in grades that they were accustomed to. On the other hand, students whose grades were unfairly affected by the power of 0 on the 0 to 100% scale, or had grade consequences applied for behavior, may experience better grades when the distortions are removed. Grading in any form does not improve learning achievement results. Learning achievement is affected by instructional strategies and targeted interventions. However, sound grading practices that produce accurate reporting provide the data from the instructional input and assessment to inform intervention and enrichment to follow. Just like when you go on a diet, changing or upgrading your scale does not improve your diet. The scale reports the data you need to make the changes in the approach. Your diet is based on input. The scale reports the data on the effects of the input. And then you can act upon the information to make adjustments to improve your success in reaching your goal. I don't know who decided that I got to talk about diet, but thank you. We've been closely monitoring student grades at our Phase 1 schools, especially the high schools. We compared the fall of 2021 grades against the fall of 2019 grades. At Sandra Day O'Connor High School, the percentage of 4s earned were almost the same. The amount of 3s in 2021 was higher than Bs in 2019, and 2s were less than Cs. The percentage of failing grades was 2% points less in 2021 than in 2019. For Barry Goldwater High School, again, the percentage of 4s in the fall of 2019 were very similar to the percentage of As in 2019. 3s and 2s in 2021 were higher than Bs and Cs in 2019, and the percentage of failing grades were identical for both years. The takeaway is that students' ability to earn scholarships or admissions was not significantly affected on the whole. However, the grades were more accurately assigned to the students based on learning.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. Grading and reporting is thoroughly connected to our district's foundational practices. Accurate reporting of student learning progress is the next logical step in the district's movement towards higher quality instruction for all students. For several years now, DVUSD has leveraged the professional learning community model of teacher collaboration. In this model, teachers arranged into teams to evaluate learning data and design instructional strategies and intervention. The team focuses on 4 questions. What do we want all students to know and be able to do? How will we know if they have learned it? How will we respond when some students do not learn? And how will we extend the learning for students who already are proficient? The structure of this foundation supports the next phases of quality instruction. To respond to the first question, what will we do? What do we want all students to know and be able to do? Teacher teams go through a process of unwrapping the standards. The process we use in this district is the teacher clarity process. Teacher teams identify the content and skills contained in the standard, break down the standard into learning progressions, define the learning intentions and success criteria, and develop learning activities to help students meet the success criteria.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. The next step in the process is to develop assessments in order to respond to the second PLC question, how will we know if they learned it? The assessments help teachers evaluate the students' learning. Part of the assessment phase is to develop scoring rubrics to match the student's demonstration of learning to clear descriptions of performance in order to identify which students are proficient, which students are struggling, and which students need enrichment, and to involve the students in this process. The utilization of rubrics allows for students to take ownership of the process as well. Accurate assessment is critical at this stage, as well as the accurate reporting of the learning data. This is where accurate and consistent grading and reporting comes into the process. With accurate data, teachers can then respond to the third and fourth questions of the PLC process. How will we respond when students do not learn? And how will we extend the learning for students who are proficient? In this phase, teachers apply a system of multi-tiered systems of support, also called MTSS, and assign students to interventions or enrichment. Because the grading and reporting is in direct alignment with the PLC process, it becomes very clear how to intervene or enrich, and with a laser-like focus. As educators decompose standards through the PLC process, they are able to take a standard which is robust and break it into progressions, which are similar to prerequisite skills or foundational pieces. Using these progressions to teach the standards, establish the trajectory toward overall standard mastery. When a student struggles with a progression, it becomes clear that this is a gap in the learning. Using this data, teachers and specialists know exactly where the student needs support and can develop interventions specifically for this progression or specific skill. This is the same for enrichment opportunities. As collaborative teams in a professional learning community, the team can then work to support all students through our response to intervention or RTI time. Together, capitalizing on one another's strengths, the content or grade level teams can achieve collective efficacy with clear, targeted skill and specific interventions.
This was a brief overview of the district's movement toward grading reform, which is an important component of quality instructional practices. Part 2, on June 28th, of this report will delve into more specifics around grading practices such as teacher training, guidance documents, grade books, the PowerSchool Parent Portal, district resources for rubrics, communication plans, and next steps. In the meantime, the community is encouraged to visit dvusd.org/grading for additional information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Galligan and team. We do have some public comments on this, so Mrs. Reed will read the admonishment.
The board invites public comment on the district's business in general and on any agenda item in specific. All speakers must observe the rules of decorum. Speakers must fill out a card listing name, address, and topic and hand it to the board secretary prior to the president calling the meeting to order. Speakers must make their comments in no more than 3 minutes. If necessary, to accommodate all speakers within the 30-minute overall limit, the board president may shorten each speaker's time. Constructive criticism is in order. Rudeness, vulgarity, disruptive conduct, or remarks disrespecting personal dignity are not in order and will not be allowed. Under the Arizona Open Meeting Law, the governing board cannot discuss or act on any items not listed on the agenda. Board members may respond to criticism made by a speaker, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be put on a future agenda.
Thank you, Mrs. Reed. Our first speaker will be Karen Schnee and then Kelsey Reed. Please step up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and then once you do that, your time will begin. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Schnee. I have she will be a senior now at Barry Goldwater High School. My son graduated at Barry Goldwater in 2020. So I have a lot of respect for what the teachers are doing and everything, but I do have some concerns. Being a trials from the grading system of last year with my daughter. And I want to let the board know some of the inconsistencies and training that may need to be done for it to be implemented fully. I want to say, first of all, as a no longer teacher, I agree completely with standard-based grading. I think it is long overdue because I think it will help those students. The way that it is implemented um, was not as effective as it could have. During Meet the Teacher Night, when we were introduced to this, I asked one simple question: how is this going to relate to my daughter? Because she is in the PUMA program, which is a college and high school. Her grades are very important to her, and she was frustrated in the fact of the teacher said to her, it does not correlate. The 4 does not go to an A. 10 minutes later into the presentation, it correlated. A 4 went to an A for GPA. When a teacher can't explain to the students or the parents in the initial meeting of what is correlating at a high school level when grades are the most important for scholarships, we've got a problem. If they could explain it. I also have the same teacher who said, you didn't get a 4 on this assignment because there was one question missing. How is one question? A 4 should not be perfection. A 4 was not perfection in the documentation, but the teachers are acting it. Another teacher told my daughter that your mom can't expect you to get a 4 just because your brother did in my class. But they're the same. They know that subject so well. They understand it. Why is it the grading scales should be different? If they know the material, if they can do the material, why are teachers saying you shouldn't be expecting to get a 4? Those, the kids are also confused, and I heard it from more than my daughter. She goes, Mom, I can't tell what grade I'm getting or how close to the next level I am or what I'm doing. There's no rubrics. You're talking about rubrics, but the kids are not high school kids are not getting those rubrics of here is a rubric for this test or this activity. And if the kids aren't getting those rubrics in their hands so they understand it, and I understand a kindergartner may not understand it, but we're talking 9, 10, 11, and 12th graders who should be getting those rubrics.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am. After Kelsey Reed, we will have Cindy Lundy. Please state your name for the record, and then your time will begin.
It's Kelsey Reed. With all due respect, the standard-based grading goals and journeys have not changed since the grading system was presented prior to COVID. So none of this is new information. What the DVUSD community needs to know is why the preparation, training, and implementation was such a disaster, and how DVUSD is planning on providing a solution. I've met with multiple teachers, principals, and parents, both within our district and within districts that are actively using SBG, in my quest to figure out what went wrong. The common theme with all of the schools is that detailed preparation and substantial training are critical for this program to be successful. Unfortunately, DVUSD took the rush approach and therefore has been training on the fly during the implementation process. Well, it's not working. Students are frustrated, parents are frustrated, and teachers are frustrated. Parents and students have been struggling with the fact that an A in SBG is a tight 5-point scale, 3.5 to 4, whereas in traditional grading, it's 11 points, 90 to 100. Several teachers are still uncertain how to draft a rubric due to the limited training. Some of the elementary teachers have been using SBG for years as a supplemental grade and are also challenged with the fact that they were originally trained to only give 4s to students who received A's in gifted classes. That's what they were taught. Only gifted children could ever receive an A because A was demonstrating above grade level proficiency. Now there's a gear switch and teachers are being trained that 4 is actually mastery, so it is equivalent to that of an A. 2 different ways to interpret SBG grades leads to nothing but confusion and inconsistency without clear and concise guidelines and training, which is why many teachers were not on the same page last year. Some valuable information has been obtained during the past year, all while feeling like a grading experiment for many of our children. Schools that have been using this program for years have already built the framework, yet DVUSD And just this past year, during the first year of implementation, it's not utilized or is just now beginning to utilize these resources. Some of these seasoned SBG schools are treating 3s and 4s as mastery and considering them the equivalent of an A. Other SBG schools are still using an alphabetic grading system as it's considered easier for both students and parents to understand. None of this is new information. There are a lot of great ideas out there. DVUSD just did not take the time to research, plan, prepare, and implement. We have a phase 1 school, Terramar, that just got through this first year of implementation, only to force the graduating 8th graders to convert back to traditional and then move on to Mountain Ridge to go to traditional and then SBG a year later. So they're going from SBG to traditional to SBG again. There are a number of problems that cannot be fixed with just some more training. DVUSD's poor planning with SBG should not continue to fall in the laps of our students and teachers. The bottom line is that DVUSD is just not ready to successfully implement the grading system.
Thank you for your comments. After Cindy Lundy, we will have Jeanette Vo. Please state your name for the record, and then your time will begin. And
Good evening. My name is Cindy Lundy. I'm a parent and a teacher in the district with 2 high school kids who have used SBG over the past year. Neither of them have been able to find a single friend or even acquaintance at the high school who understands and or finds it beneficial. One story I've heard, a student has had straight A's his entire academic career with maybe a B or 2 over the years in DVUSD. He's watched his grades daily, and anytime he dipped below a 90%, he worked harder, studied harder, and tried anything that he could to get that grade up to an A. Usually he succeeded. With this grading system, he's not been given rubrics. He doesn't understand what's happening with his grades. And this past semester, he earned half 3s and half 4s without understanding anything about earning the grades that he did. He said his teachers provided no explanation or little explanation for the grades given in most cases. He had no clue whether he was close to a 2 or close to a 4. Some teachers told him a 4 was impossible to achieve. So guess what he did? Along with so many others, he stopped trying. He can earn a 3 putting in the bare minimum and has no idea how or if it's possible to get a 4. So his attitude was, why even bother? This is the mindset that you're creating with this system and thousands of students, and now you're spreading it throughout the entire district. Hashtag extraordinary should be changed to hashtag mediocre. You're teaching these kids that mediocrity is good enough, and that will get them nowhere in the real world. I stand with way more parents, teachers, and students than you see here tonight in requesting that this ineffective grading practice be extinguished immediately before you cause any more damage to the students that you claim to serve. That's my speech, but I have a little bit of time left. I just want to respond to a couple of the slides that I saw up there. They were posted really quickly, but I just wanted to reply to one of them that students got a grade of 0 out of 10 for not turning in a movie permission slip. I don't know any teacher ever who has graded for turning in a movie permission slip. So there's that. Some of the items that you put in those grading things, I think, were a little bit far-reaching. Also, responding to the 390s and the 0 in our school, and I'm sure it's across the district, we are not allowed to give 0s. We haven't been for years, ever since I started working here. We have to give a 50% whether the assignment is turned in or not. And in that case, the student would get, if he would get a 390s and a 0, you came up with a D, I believe. But if he got 390s and a 50, which is what we are required to give, the student would have come up with an 80%, which is a pretty fair score. So I take issue with some of the things that were presented.
thank you for your comments. If you state your name for the record, then your time will begin.
My name is Jeanette Vo. I'm speaking at this meeting to voice my concerns about standard-based grading. My high school daughter attends Mountain Ridge High School, and we have one more year before we change this grading system, and I'm thankful for that. I'm concerned about the lack of training for teachers and the lack of education on the system for students and parents. Standardized-based grading does not correlate with our system and the current system we are using. An A does not equate to a 4, a 3 does not equate to a B, and so forth. A 4 is a work above grade level or at a higher level. That keeps changing, where 3 is on grade level. But students who are used to the percentage-based grading system are often left confused and feel defeated if they go from all A's to 3s. If you looked at the current data the schools are using that you showed on the screen, you saw more of the schools that are currently using the system, their A's dropped, but their B's increased a lot. Those students that are used to A's aren't going to understand when they drop down to B, and this can affect their college enrollment. This also can lead to low self-esteem and stress, causing them to give up. Our district wants to move to standard-based grading, but we continue to use Canvas and Power Schools, which uses percentage-based grading and not standard-based grading. If we're going to commit to standard-based grading, we need to change those systems as well, which has not happened so far, leaving students and staff who are using the standard-based grading frustrated. We need a plan in place for every teacher to be on the same page when it comes to standardized grading, and students need clear rubrics for each assignment and each test so they know what they have to do to receive a 4, 3, 2, and 1, and that is not happening. Due to all the recent changes and disruptions to our students' learning because of the pandemic and other choices by the district, I believe that now is not the time to completely change the grading system. We'll lose more students to other districts as well as teachers, and there's already a teacher shortage in the state. I'm also concerned about how this will affect our students when it comes to colleges and scholarship opportunities. We have an opportunity to look at the data from the past year, look at the district tests from the schools who did standard-based grading versus the schools who used percentage-based grading, and compare the results on those district tests. Were they similar, or did those students that were doing the standard-based grading start giving up in the middle of the year? We need to analyze why, if this is true. Is it because students and teachers are not understanding the grading system properly, or is it because the system as a whole is not working with the tools that we're using? Also, take time to interview the students and the teachers and the parents and find out what is working and what is not working. It is not too late to decide that this is not right now and to go back and do more work to make sure that this does succeed when we do go forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Members, do you have questions? Mrs. Fisher?
I understand this is going to be a two-part, so I'm just going to ask questions as they come up in that part. And then we have requested an additional meeting to discuss as a board. Ms. Paperman and I submitted that request. But I'm going to limit just to today. As I look at this, how are you avoiding subjective data or criteria? Because without points or percentages, and I'm looking at what you have here, the work, you're not taking into account the actual work, so you're not taking into points or percentages, then the results are subjective. It's a teacher's opinion whether or not someone has met that criteria. Now, some teachers, that would maybe great, some maybe not, but people are people, and even if the child's behavior is not put into this mix, the biases or personalities or and there's so many factors in where an opinion is formed, that would be a factor in this. So that's one of my concerns. So that's the question. And just so that you're not the only one talking about diets. When I think about this, I kind of think my best friend, we go hiking every Saturday morning. And after we're done hiking, she says she's going on a diet. And I'm like, what do you mean going on a diet? She goes, well, I'm going home to take a nap because you can't eat when you're asleep. So I just call it a diet and then it's all good. Just taking a nap isn't going to help her lose weight. And my concern is that this is more subjective than we would like, I think. And perhaps you can correct me on that.
President O'Brien, Ms. Fisher, I'll ask Kathy and perhaps Tate or any of the other panel members to chat. But Kathy, if you'd start us out.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So President O'Brien and Ms. Fisher and all, Grading is always subjective, no matter what kind of system you use. If you're using a 0 to 100% scale, if you're using a different scale, if you're using all anecdotal, if you're using a rubric, it all comes down to a teacher and their professional judgment and how they craft their scoring. So with a rubric, working through a PLC team and working through the standards, there is more consistency and more relatability to the actual learning standard. So you may wonder, if we just rely on the numbers, isn't that objective? The problem is with the numbers is there's still a person behind crafting those numbers. There's still a person deciding how many points something's worth, something's going to be weighted. So I think with grading, knowing that there is some subjectivity to it, and that's why we have highly trained professionals that are in the classroom and are devising how they are going to evaluate the students on the learning, and the key is on the learning. That's the important part.
Tate or Karen, would you address that as teachers in the classroom?
I would echo exactly what Kathy just said, that there is subjectivity when you're a teacher and you're working with your students. But there's also, there's not always subjectivity. If there's a test and it's 24 questions, that is divisible out of 4, and it comes very clearly, this is a 3, this is a 4, this is a 2, this is a 1. So it kind of depends on the assignment or what's happening, and obviously you're hoping that you are, there is some more subjectivity happening, that you're being guided by a rubric and that the students understand. But also you are having more conversations with students in standard-based grading, to where you're drilling down into the specific standards that they're learning. When typically when you're on a large scale of points, you're just kind of saying, hey, here's what you're getting. But with the standards, you're saying, hey, you did really well on this standard, but you need improvement on this standard. And that's what this shows the student. And you're having those conversations so they understand exactly what they need to work on and what they need to improve, if they need intervention or if they don't need intervention, so that they can really work towards the proficiency in the areas that they specifically need.
Karen, would you add anything?
I think when we're writing assessment questions and writing them at a 3 level, because that's where we want students to be at proficient, if a student is showing that proficiency, then you can delve in, as Tate was saying, more questions to see can that student do, if they cannot reach that 3 level, then can they do it with a little more assistance? Or can you then delve in more to get to, can they explain themselves in more of a way that you can see their mastery of that standard, and are they able to extend that in other ways? I think, as Tate said, the conversations that happen with each student really gets us knowing where that student is on each standard.
I was going to just go ahead and pass and except for something you said. You said you set to go to a 3 level. I can see why that right off the bat is problematic. In high school, I wouldn't have cared. In high school, I was lucky to get out of high school, mostly because of behaviors. But my bachelor's was a 4.0. My master's was a 3.85. I cried when I got 1B in my master's program. I took it because it's what I earned. I struggled, but had I been writing on a scholarship, a 3 would have been considered a B, whether we want to say it's a B or not. And in some scholarships, that just doesn't cut mustard. Even with a 4.0 and a 3.85, the only scholarship I was able to obtain because of family income was just enough to complete my Becker review for the CPA exam. That's a couple $1,000s. And when you're looking at a degree of $130,000, that's a drop in the bucket. That's problematic for our kids. And so if we're trying to truly get to a 3, what we're trying to do in that case would be to guarantee that our students do not make it to college on a scholarship.
President O'Brien,
That's concerning to me.
Ms. Fisher,
Mhm.
prior to any grading reform, in general, a B is considered proficient for a student. Now, whether you equate a 3 or a 4 with a B or an A, in Deer Valley, and I would say in most every school system, our goal, our ethical goal, is to ensure that all students have made proficiency on the grade level standards so that when they promote to the next grade level or they graduate, we have assured both our children and our parents that they have met what is deemed necessary to promote or to graduate. I understand what you're saying. Both a 3 and a 4 are proficient. And we are going to talk further about this at the June 28th meeting and hopefully better explain it to you. So if you'll just help us, give us grace until the June 28th meeting, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mrs. Ordway. So Mrs. Ordway?
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for all of the information. And for many years, I have been following this as it started, I think, maybe 12 or 15 years ago, and when Mike Anderson started doing this at Barry Goldwater. So that was my first introduction to it. So since that time, I have had the opportunity to talk to not only our teachers, administrators, so on and so forth in Deer Valley, but across the valley and also in different states. So just with that in mind, I've got a couple of specific questions. So within the 9 schools, are the rubrics for the academic number grades the same across the grade levels and the content areas? That's my first question. If you want to answer that, I have a few questions. So if you want to answer as they go ahead.
Who will answer that question?
President O'Brien, Ms. Ordway, I want to make sure I understand the question. So are you asking if the rubrics are the same across grade levels? Is that what I heard?
I'm asking if the 9 schools that have taken this on have the same rubrics for the academic number grades across the grade levels and the content areas.
So for our K-8s, do all 8th grade math classes that are using or have implemented standard-based grading, do all the 8th grade math classes use the same rubrics?
So for the 9 schools that are involved with the new grade scales, each PLC teams, which sometimes they are multi-school and sometimes they are within a school, they work on the same rubrics. So if there's a level team that's all 8th grade at a school, then they would work on the same rubrics. If there are multi-school teams, which there are many, then they do work on the same rubrics together too. All rubrics are based on the standards and the performance level descriptors.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So in some cases, there are some, they're going to look very similar, but in some cases, there's some nuances to them just because of the portion of the instruction that has been completed by the time they do their measurement, what learning progression they're on and so forth. So there's nuances to the rubrics between the teams.
The other thing to note is that the performance level descriptors are given to us through the Arizona standards. So our teachers and our administrators go to the Arizona standards as well as our curriculum documents because the performance level descriptors are provided in there, and that is what makes up portions of the rubrics. Now, that's not to say that we are perfect. In fact, we are not. As you heard some of our parents say, rubrics is an area that we need to continue to work on. But we are informed by the performance level descriptors for the standards from the ADE and the state that have been provided to us.
Mrs. Ordway,
Okay, so
go ahead. Go ahead, Mrs. Ordway.
So what I'm trying to understand is that being a unified school district, we're trying to have equity in learning because we're obviously, well, to me it's obvious that we are saying out loud, so we're vocally showing that our concentration is on learning. We want our children to learn, not just get a grade because they brought in their homework, even though they didn't understand it. So we want to remove all of that and have pure academic success and our steps to that journey. So for me, when I'm hearing that we are implementing this standard base grading in a unified school district, but we don't have the rubrics the same K6, K8, or across campuses, it seems to me that perhaps it's just like, it doesn't make sense to me that it will be equitable. So then I move on to high school. So if we have 5 high schools at 5 different parts of this journey, and we don't have we don't have people that are the educators, the administrators that can articulate what does this mean, because automatically when you say A, B, C, or D, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and we know that technically in standard-based grading it is not an equitable. You don't. They're not. They don't equate. One is not. In other words, the numbers and the letters don't match. So it just seems to me that we're going to the end before we have fixed or learned the beginning, and the mindset of standard-based grading concentrates on the learning and the mastery so that the students actually understand. I'm not quite sure why we have to do the grade transition at this point when we are still trying to get the rubrics to be uniform, and we're at all different stages in the 3 stages that we are given. It just doesn't make sense that we would also then do the grading. The grading seems to me, from what I've read, what I've heard, and what I'm listening to, seems to be the last part. And it seems that if you start at the end and try to force your way backwards, we're going to lose a lot. And when we do this transition, that seems to have a lot of issue with the transition of the grading. The students are the ones that suffer. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Ms. Ordway.
Go ahead, Dr. Gallagher.
Anita or Lynn or Bobby, would you mind just talking a bit to the concern that Ms. Ordway has brought up?
President Bryan, Ms. Ordway, Dr. Finch, as I was listening to you, Ms. Ordway, I think what came to my mind is when we work together in our PLCs, what we do on those early release Fridays, our teachers are being more aligned with their work and their standards compared to what we would have before, where there would be individual, I guess, if I compare it to house building, a general contractor, where each house might look different on how they're graded, versus each PLC now will be consistent, at least with their standards and their rubrics. Yes, we can always get better in developing our rubrics, and I think as we continue to develop that inter-rater reliability from school to school and PLC to PLC can always improve. But when I look at that, when you ask about the fairness, or I don't know, it wasn't fairness. I'm sorry, exactly. I forgot your words, but I look at it being more consistent within, and even the evidence we have in our grades and the results that we have in our grades for this year. It has shown that the benefit of our students being able to see what they need. So by name and need, they're able to determine what standard they still need to effectively learn, have an ability to retest, and we can reteach them, and then they demonstrate that learning at that proficient level. So my, I guess, argument or pushback would be, at this point in traditional grading, we didn't have consistency all across 5 high schools. There was still variation with how Algebra 1 teachers would teach at one high school versus what is taught at the other high schools. I feel now we're coming closer together and being more consistent with that. I don't know if that answers your question, but in my years of experience, when you're aligned to a PLC, you have that accountability, and there's more accuracy in that. So I don't know if Bobby or Dr. Stolk, if you want to add to that or not. And I don't know if Mrs. Ordway, if I answered your question. I tried to.
Okay. Is somebody else going to talk to it? Because I have a question for you, Lynn, if they're not.
Mrs. Ordway, go ahead and answer. If you have another question for Dr. Miller, ask him the question.
So I guess all of what you're saying makes sense to me, that we are doing our PLCs and we are able to drill down, and I'm hoping that we're all using the same standards. However, I'm trying to understand, why is it so important, necessary at this moment in time, as opposed to waiting to do the letter to the number transition on the grade, as people learn how we're doing, what the kids are doing and how it's getting better, and the data is showing, why we can't transition into the letter to the number at another point in time as opposed to right now. I don't know how that affects the going backwards into the work. How would that affect if you're doing all the work, the same work, you're watching if what intervention a child needs. You give the teachers a chance to make that paradigm change in their head, so they don't have like the standard-based grading gradebook on the desk and then the other one that I have underneath the desk. I mean, you just give everyone a chance to concentrate on what they're doing without that transition to the grade. So I guess I'm missing why that's the necessary piece right now.
Right. Ms. O'Brien, Mrs. Ordway, and Dr. Finch, I think the best thing I can say, and again, this is probably more, there's some research behind this, but it's really that philosophy of being a lifelong learner. I do feel that preparing our students for the future is the right approach. And the example, or the reason I say that, is for my 30 years in education, I've been graded, evaluated, assessed by standards-based approach. There's my boss right now, Dr. Z, would give me, these are the ISLIC standards, this is what I need to know, and this is what I need to accomplish. Our teachers are given that. So I feel when we are giving that to our students, we're preparing them for the future. If they're, again, an engineer or whatever that may be, and we're allowing them to have that self-reflection and self-advocating and self-efficacy to say, okay, this is what I still need to do. So when you ask why, I think my response would just be, why not? If it's the right thing to do for me as a leader and an educator, and that's what the board, you, Dr. Finch, expects me to do, I feel that it's my job to do that. It's never our position to be unfair. We're trying to, again, improve that accuracy and in the grading piece. So that is what I would say is why I would say, why now? I don't know that it's an urgency, but I think it's the right thing to do. And once we know what the right thing to do is, then I feel it's our job to do the right thing. So I don't know if my friend Dr. Stolk can help if I phone a friend or not.
If I might add maybe some translation is, and Mrs. Ordway, feel free to correct me if I've misunderstood what you are saying, is I believe what Mrs. Ordway is trying to ask is that it's not that she understands why the work that you all want to do. I believe the question she's asking is, why is it necessary to go from A, using the A, B, C, D, F to 0 through 4 at this moment in time right now, is it not possible to maintain the A through F, which we know parents and students are fairly familiar with what those grades stand for, rather than going to that 0 for 4 and make 0 through 4 come later in the implementation when there is maybe better understanding? Is that a good translation, Mrs. Ordway?
Yes, I believe that's what I said a couple of times, but I heard you say it, so yes. I'm just wondering if this
Okay.
transition from letters to numbers, why does that have to be now? That's my
Perfect.
question.
Dr. Stulk, would you like to answer that? Your microphone is on. Nope, try his.
I'd be glad just to share a little bit about our journey and President O'Brien and Mrs. Ordway. I look at that same question sometimes, like, why now? The shift from 0 to 4, it's quick for people to go back and just simply translate in that, say 4 is an A, 3 is a B, right? So we go right back to what we've always known. All of us went through school ourselves. I'm not sure that we can answer here at the table the exact like when we make the shift, but I think the shift is right now, the focus is not on a letter grade. The discussions are not about the A, B, or C because we changed that. And so for us at our school, it's really helped us to ensure that we don't fall right back to, okay, but that is at an A. And the discussions really, I think it's important that we not think too much about the rubrics because there are times where rubrics are part of what we reflect on to see where we fall with the standard, but the discussions are a lot more about learning progressions and about ensuring that the focus is on the support that the students need in their own understanding and reflection on the growth that they're making towards those standards. And in high school, the important time for grades, of course, is at the end of the semester when it goes on a transcript. And so we've extended the opportunity for students to continue to demonstrate their growth. And you may be teaching, say, in an English classroom, you may be teaching content where the students are getting some feedback on the rubric, but we haven't gone in much depth yet in October towards that standard, but we'll continue to have a thread that runs throughout the semester. And so as the students are developing more and more skill and they're able to better define their learning, then they have those opportunities all year long to still improve on it. So I think that the 0 to 4 scale helps us in that progression where the students are understanding more and more about their own learning, not relating it back to a letter grade. So the timing, yes, it's going to be a discussion no matter what time we make that move, but I know what we've seen at our school is we're not talking anymore really about an A, B, C, or D. We're talking all about progressions. And for our students, some of them need more progressions than others. And I think it's got the best conversation isn't even about the rubrics or the 0 to 4, but more about the learning.
Mrs. Sarah.
So, Brian, I have one more question, and then I'm done because I'll
Okay,
email.
Mrs. Ordway, real quick, Mrs. Sarah would also like to give you some feedback about your
I can't
question.
see you because I only have 2 devices now. But go ahead.
Go ahead.
President O'Brien, Ms. Ordway, Dr. Finch. I want to echo what Dr. Stulk shared because it really is about the conversations. And I know, so I'm going to be the principal of Mirage next year, but I can speak from my experience at Union Park as the assistant principal, where we feel very successful in our implementation of standards-based grading year one. And the reason that we feel successful is because of the conversations with our students, because they really understood where they were because of the progressions. And so I spoke during the presentation to the progressions, which is breaking a standard apart into all of the smaller pieces that have to be achieved in order to master a standard, which is a big concept. And there's a lot of little pieces that go into mastering that standard. So when the teachers do their work within PLCs and break those progressions down, then it becomes a very clear learning journey. And the kids understand the learning journey, or at least our kids did at Union Park, and the parents understand the learning journey. And so they can see exactly where there's learning gaps, because each one of those progressions loosely equates to prerequisite skills, which is something that's understandable to what we all were raised with, prerequisite skills. And so you can look and see where are they having gaps. And when you can see a gap in a progression, that progression is one specific skill, then the student knows exactly where they need to grow. And they can go home and explain, I was doing well, and now I'm confused about this one progression. And what that does is allow the teacher to pull small groups for any kids with just that one progression and really focus on one particular gap. And the kids understand that, and the teachers understand that, and our instruction becomes so meaningful at that point. And our kids at Union Park were very knowledgeable in the standards, more so than they ever have been this last year, because they know exactly what goes into mastery of one standard, because they understand all of those progressions. And so when we would go into classes and talk to the kids, they could tell us exactly how well they were doing. And if they were doing very well on every progression, they could say that they were showing a positive trajectory towards that mastery. Or they could say, I am confused on this progression and this progression. And then that made it so we knew exactly where they needed to focus. They knew where to focus. It wasn't like a shot in the dark anymore. It was very clear. And then it validated all the work that the teachers were doing, because now all of the PLC work, where we're breaking it into progressions and then learning intentions and then success criteria, the teachers were doing that work, and now this was seeing it through with this progression. I mean, with the standards-based grading, it was seeing it through to its completion. So it was completing our PLC process is what it was doing. And on the scale, as opposed to letter grades, students were far better able to explain why they had a 3 or a 2 than they were why they were a 72 versus a 78, because that's very arbitrary for a student to say, I'm a B, well, I have a 72, I have a 78. There's a big scale there, but they could definitely say, I'm a 2 because I still require some support. I can't quite get it by myself. And so that they were able to articulate that far better than they were to explain why they were a B.
Okay, and Dr. Galligan would also like to add something, Mrs. Ordway.
I'm going to defer to Kathy.
President O'Brien and Ms. Ordway, Dr. Finch. I just wanted to add one more piece I think is aligned to what Ms. Ordway is asking. And I think she's asking, why move from letters to numbers? We all were comfortable with letters. We understood letters. And that's true. Really, the symbol that we use is just that. It's a symbol. It's the meaning behind the symbol that's important. And when we think of the 0 to 100% scale, there's a lot of problems with that scale. We did have a speaker that talked about moving to 50 to 100%, and that does help, but it's still based on a transactional situation where kids are working to earn points and not necessarily focused on what the learning is behind those points. And I think that's what everyone was talking about. It's now the conversation about the learning. Moving to the numbers is just a help to move to that type of thinking. So that's what we want to get to. Again, the M symbol, it could be unicorns, rainbows, and sunshines. As long as we knew what those meant, that's the important piece. And we want it to represent the learning rather than just an accumulation of points. And in many cases, in our old system, it was not consistent. There were so many different schemas on how those points were arranged. It was highly inconsistent in our district, and we're working to get more consistent and more about the learning.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, Mrs. Ordway, your next question.
Oh, okay, and I'm sorry for doing this, but it's like 11 o'clock here. So anyway, I'll be real quick. So how do you calculate the final grade with the 0 to 4 system? And then the other question would be, can you get a 1.5 or a 2.5? And the third one is, I
thought that when we went to the PLCs, and then when we articulated, or when we went from, we had third grade teachers talk to fourth grade teachers, we were collecting that data so we could see what we were doing, which is, I know that we're doing it much more deeply right now, but I'm just trying to figure out, as Kathy said, if it could be unicorns or whatever. My mindset is not, I want kids to learn. I've always thought that the late homework and all that was ridiculous, because I had a daughter that was late with everything but aced all her tests, and she did not get A's, although she mastered her material. So I'm just trying to figure out, if I go with Kathy, unicorns or letters or numbers, if what we're doing is learning and we're concentrating on the learning, which pretty much people have thought that we have, but now we really are, the translation between a letter and a number could be done within the letter and move to a number. I don't know. I'm just saying that. I've heard teachers that cannot articulate what a 2 is, what a 3 is. I've heard different students, parents, teachers, kids say, and we had a speaker at the last meeting who went to O'Connor, who said he got, a 3. I think he said he got a 3 on a homework assignment, which I thought homework was not part of this. So I don't know that everyone's where Union Park was, or everyone is where O'Connor is. And my trepidation with this right now is that we're not all understanding how this works, and we're concentrating, it sounds like the energy is going into this transformation from an A to a letters to numbers, and really where the energy in my mind needs to go is to the mindset, the implementation, and the understanding, so it can be articulated to somebody, and it's not an arbitrary, well, you can never get a 4 because, and if I walk from classroom to classroom or campus to campus, or a K-6 to a K-8, or a middle school or a high school, I'll get 15 different answers as of right now, and I don't know how that changes so quickly before August 3rd. And anyone can answer that, and I'll save the rest for later. And thank you for indulging me.
President O'Brien, Mrs. Ordway, part of the first part of that last type of question, where you had the 3 very specific questions, I do believe we will be talking about Power School and grading. And as you mentioned, does it matter if the symbol is an A, a unicorn, a 2, whatever it might be? I think we'll be able to potentially clear up many of your questions on the 28th. And it's not that we are putting you off. We really wanted to share the journey that we have taken and where we are in alignment with all of the initiatives that we have going, and then moving into the very specific nuts and bolts. And I know that's where everybody likes to go first, is the nuts and bolts. But we really wanted to share the why. When you have an A through F scale, the traditional scale is a 101-point scale. Even, as Kathy said, when you use a 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, there is still a discrepancy. I know your question is, why now? And for the 9 schools that have bravely moved forward with this, similar to our implementation with Tech Rich, and similar to our implementation with a new assessment system, School City, years ago, we generally take time with a few brave schools and leaders and teachers to do a pre-implementation so we can identify the areas that still need to be worked on. And as you have heard from parents and teachers and students, we are working through that. Kathy has shared data with you in our updates, as has Dr. Miller, in that when we looked at the grades in comparison, and you saw some of the 2 slides, but we've even looked deeper than that with Scott Smith's help. The differences between the grades were not significant. They were different because, as Kathy said, when we are removing behaviors that either inflate or deflate, there is going to be a bit of an adjustment to begin with. But Ms. Ordway, I would just say that we will do our best. We have those questions written down. Sheila always gives us all of the questions, and we will make sure that those are addressed, and we'll try and put some information in the update before the next meeting so you all can read through that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Galligan. Mrs. Reed?
Very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Ordway.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions, and I was taking some notes while you guys were providing answers, and so I have some follow-up questions on that. So I might be a little jumbled and go all over the place, and I apologize. And Dr. Galligan, if there's something that I say that isn't pertinent to this evening, it would be better to address next time too. I'm fine with that. I just want you to know where I'm at with my thought process on this. So I understand that this has been a progression that we've been working on, for over a decade, and something that the district decided to do before I became a board member in 2019. And so I understand, where we are and why we're headed down this road. However, I think that with COVID and COVID fatigue, it's almost like when I was pregnant with baby number 4 and I had 3 kids at home, and somebody looked at me and said, it's like you're drowning and somebody throws you a baby. Have fun. And I feel like that's where a lot of our teachers and our students and our parents are at, is that the last, 3 school years, we feel like we're drowning, and then you're throwing us a baby and changing all of these things that we knew, and it feels a little unstable. So I think that that's part of it, is just everybody's just really tired, and we just are craving normal that we're not ever going to have back again. And now this is really different, and it's a huge second order change, and so we're just trying to wrap our brains around it. So that being said, there were a couple of things, and I just might be a really tired, overwhelmed parent with, having kids in all different areas. But one of the slides on here was about the PRAG, and I was like, I don't remember looking at that. And I just had an 8th grader that promoted. And so and I know that as a board, we get so much information all of the time, and it may have been in a board update, and I may have just overlooked it and marked it to go back and read, and I didn't go back and read it. But I'm wondering how many of our parents haven't been on that page of the website, and maybe if that's something that should be added to the papers that we get at the beginning of the school year, that we have to sign off that we saw this. Because I think that as we're transitioning, there's some pretty vital information that was in there that would have been really helpful. I think for a lot of my friends who had questions about grading, would have been helpful for them to have that resource. So that's my first request. One of the, and I think, Kathy, I think you had said it when we were talking about grading scales, you had mentioned something about professional judgment. And, our teachers are professionals, and they are specifically trained, and they can, have continuing education, and they are craftsmen at what they do. That being said, there was a lot of misinformation that was out about how you grade, and a lot of, you can, being told back to me, my child was told that they can never get a 4 because if they could get a 4, then they should be teaching the class. And I'm like, no, that's not how standard-based grading is supposed to work. But in their professional judgment, that's what was either told to them, or they heard through the game of telephone, and that was their understanding. And so to Mrs. Fisher's point about this being subjective, and I understand that all grading is subjective, parenting is subjective, right? Everything we do is subjective. But with this, it seems like there is a wider berth of subjectivity and abstract thinking. And we all know, right? We have kids and, teach kids. Different levels of people's abstract thinking varies greatly. And so when you are overwhelmed or you're tired or you're stressed, which is 115% of all of our staff, you don't want to think abstractly. You want to, you want things to be easier. You don't want to have to put that effort out all of the time. And so I think that some of our teachers took the path of least resistance of trying to figure this out, and it didn't always sync up. And so I think that's where the frustration is lying, is that things aren't consistent, like Mrs. Ordway said. And if we're going to be a unified school district, it's really important that the rubrics that O'Connor is using are going to be the same rubrics that Mountain Ridge is using. And talking to parents, that wasn't happening. And parents are smart. They were comparing, what did your kid get on this paper versus what did my kid get on this paper, for different teachers at the same school, and also different students. And they don't want to feel like their kid is getting less of an opportunity than another student. Because as a parent, and when I'm paying another mortgage for college tuition and my kid has a 50% scholarship, I mean, this is, grades matter. And, an A or a B or a 4 or a 3 or a 3 to a 2, that's equates to thousands of dollars sometimes in scholarship money. And so, parents and students are nervous. There was one point, we were talking about rounding grades and about the rubric, and I want to get some clarity on this. Karen, you had talked about that when you write questions, when teachers are writing questions, we're writing them to a 3. Is that standard now, that when we're before, or schools that are not using standard-based grading, when they're writing questions, they're writing to what would be comparable? So, and I'm sorry, I hate to do this, but comparable to like a low B, high C level? Is that a safe assumption? Like, what are schools that are not doing SBG? What are they writing their questions to? Like, what level?
If you don't mind, I'll take this first. President O'Brien, Julie, and Ms. Reed.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay. All of the teachers are writing their questions to meet proficiency of the standard. So that would generally be considered the 3 level. When we're looking at the 4 level, we're looking at things more like consistency, more creativity, sophistication, transfer of knowledge. We do have guidance documents for each standard for teachers to use. For instance, in math, we've developed where each of those levels are clearly outlined. And it doesn't matter what grade scale they're on. This is what they're looking for. They're looking for the proficient level, the above proficient level, slightly below, and when students aren't meeting. Those are described for each of those standard levels, and they even a lot of times have sample questions so teachers can fully understand what that means. So they can understand a 2 level would be missing some of the criteria that the 3 level would have. The 4 level would be adding another layer of sophistication, whether it be more academic language, whether it be being able to transfer the numbers or complexity of the numbers. It would be clearly outlined for them.
I understand that, but for a school that's not doing standard-based grading, what would be the proficiency level that a parent or a student or a teacher understand? Would that be like a C, or would that be a B?
Well, that's kind of the problem with our old traditional system. It could be whatever the points were that the teacher decided to. So that's where we've had a lot of trouble with our traditional grading system, and where teachers had a lot of leeway. So we're trying to close that gap so it's a little tighter and more consistent.
Okay, thank you.
I think Karen has
Oh, yeah.
some additional information.
Another piece of that is when you're writing a traditional, say a traditional test, and you have 25 points on the test, and it's a percentage of right and wrong. It's not looking at each individual standard, which is how we're writing things now. So I think there is a difference. We're looking specifically at standards versus like an entire accumulation of learning and looking at percentage of right and wrong, and that's the percentage you get. So you're a C because you missed half or a piece of the questions, versus if you're doing one specific standard and testing that standard and seeing where a student is on that standard specifically. I think it's a big difference in looking at a student's, it's just a percentage of learning versus their specific ability to do a specific standard.
I understand. That makes sense. I just wanted to get some clarification on that. And then when we talk about the rubrics, so this was part of one of the issues that a teacher brought up to me, and it was a big frustration, and so much of a frustration that she decided to not renew her contract, was using the rubric and then having to come up with the final grade. So, Tate, you had said something about how you take the score and you divide it by 4. Can you explain that just a little bit? So, here's what I'm trying to get. So, I'm trying to understand how you get the final grade when you are using the rubric, how you get a 2.3 or a 3.5, or does that make sense?
Sure, and it varies because what my example I was using before was if it's like a multiple choice test, like the ACT, and there's 24 questions that, and you divide that, that's going to easily tell you a 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's very easy to come up to what your grade is. If you're looking at something like an argumentative essay, for example, where we have a district rubric that is consistent across all the schools, you're looking at how is the student doing it, and it's broken down. It's pieced together, and so you could look and say, oh, all right, I have all 4s and 1 3, so that's a 4. Or I could say I have all 3s and 1 4, so that's a 3. The difficulty comes in the subjectivity. If I have 2 4s and 2 3s, is this more of a 4 essay or is this more of a 3 essay? So, we're trying to move towards, or I believe the district is trying to move towards a more holistic rubric so that isn't quite the case, that it's a little bit clearer of if you hit these points, then that's going to be your 4 or that's going to be your 3. Does that sort of answer what you're saying? You're asking?
It does, but I'm wondering if there are teachers that are averaging those different sections, and then they're getting like the decimal numbers, right? And then I think the frustration is when those numbers are being input into the grade book, and then they get rounded. And so you might have a student that really did a 2-level, paper, an essay project, but it gets rounded to a 3 because of the way that works. And so I think that there's some frustration there with teachers that they feel like they are not able to grade accurately, and they don't know what else to do about it, especially when it comes to teachers that are teaching college level classes. And there's some other things that they have to be responsible for.
Ms. O'Brien, Ms. Reed, that will be something we address on June 28th when we talk about the grade book and the grade book system.
Okay, perfect. So the other thing that would be helpful for me is when we're talking about that, and Karen, you mentioned the progression throughout the semester. And I know that from teaching, there are some standards that you hit once and you check the box and you're done. You're done with that standard for the whole entire year. And then there's other standards that are progression standards that are mapped throughout, the semester or the entire grade. And so I think that might be helpful to address with parents, and also to make sure that students understand the difference and that they understand for those progression grades how they can measure those. Because I think that's another issue, is that students don't know how to tell the difference, or what their teachers are looking for, or when they're trying to look for their grade, the grades aren't put into the grade book quickly enough, and they don't know, like what one of our speakers was talking about. They don't know where they are. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I think would be really helpful for all of us is if we could have an example of a lesson with a rubric and with it being graded. So maybe like if we have student samples, maybe 2 or 3 samples, so we can see what the difference is and we can see what all of this looks like. Because I haven't had a student that's, or I haven't had a child with standard-based grading, so I don't have any firsthand knowledge of any of this, and none of the board members have students or kids that have this either. So I think that would be helpful for us to better understand. And then for the parents that are tuning in whose school might be opting into this next year, that would be great. I think that's it for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Reed. And to Mrs. Reed's last request regarding samples, I would request we have a math sample and a language arts sample. And if 2 is enough, that's great. If you're going to add something else, pick another subject. So that gives us a fair, and maybe if that's able to be provided in a Friday update so we can kind of digest it ahead of time, would probably be a good idea. Standard-based mindset came to Stetson Hills approximately 10 years ago. I know standard-based grading's been at Barry Goldwater High School for a long time. What I'd like to know, though, is standard-based mindset, those principles, being used consistently through all of our schools in this district?
President O'Brien, would you repeat that one more time?
Standard-based mindset, and my understanding of those principles would be you cannot receive a score between 0 and 48, because at Stetson Hills, 49 was what you got if you did nothing. Like if you didn't turn in your math paper, you got a 49. That was the new 0. But if you made any other kind of effort, you received something between 50 and 100. The second principle was the ability to have reassessment. So if you struggled or did not get the score you wanted on an assessment, you worked with your teacher to relearn, do whatever it was they wanted for relearning, and then you scheduled a reassessment time and you could reassess. Are those 2 principles with standard-based mindset consistently implemented in every single one of our Deer Valley schools?
President O'Brien, no, it is not.
Okay.
So what we are working on with the 9 initial schools and the 7 that are coming on is that more consistent understanding. If you remember back to one of the first few slides, the only thing that we have asked all 42 schools to be consistent on is to remove behavior elements from grading, whether it's the traditional 100 scale or it's the 4 to 0 or the 4 to 1. That is the only one across our schools. Kathy, would you add to that?
I will just add that in the last few years, several years back, schools were given the opportunity to move from the 0 to 100% scale to either the 49 to 100 or 50 to 100 scale. And that was really to help address the problem with the 0 to 100% scale. So it wasn't true truly fully standards-based grading. It was moving towards that mindset of evening out the scale. But schools did have some choice in that back in the day. So we're moving towards bringing everybody to the same scaling system. And it's virtually the same, 1 to 4, 0 to 4, in that it evens out the scale. It's just basically reducing it by, dividing by 10.
Right, but for prior history, I mean, from the standpoint of what we have done in the past, we do not have all of our schools, they've not transferred to a standard-based mindset with the 2 principles I discussed. We've had opportunities for schools to take on different ways of looking at it, and I'm not suggesting that the standard-based grading. I just wanted to understand the standard-based mindset. Okay. Do we have, we originally implemented this with kindergarten and first grade, I believe. Is that correct?
President O'Brien, we have had a 4-to-1 scale and still have that at K6. And that 4-to-1 scale is not necessarily a true identity of the standards as the principals and the teachers up here have indicated. What it was able to indicate to students and parents was that on this particular essential standard, this is where you are. And you could find what the 4321 represents in the PRAG, the Promotion, Retention, Accelerating Grading Handbook. So yes, we have had that. But along with that, there was no computation, there was no changing of a grade. A teacher still could make a decision. Is that student on that in reading, math, science, social studies, an A, B, C, D, or F? And it would just have that 4321 marked on the standards. There was not a true alignment there, and that is what we are also working on, is that true alignment.
Oh, okay, I need it, sorry, to be more simple. I feel like my question. So in K through 6, I'm going to see if I understood what you said. In all of our K through 6s, and is this true in our K through 6 grades that have 7th and 8th grade as well, have converted to a...
President O'Brien, the report card for K6 students has, let's say, English language arts, where a teacher will give an A, B, C, D, or F. With the standards that have been identified for that year for ELA, a teacher would mark 4, 3, 2, or 1. It's just a more communication for a parent. It is the report card that gives that grade. When you ask, is that how teachers grade? No, it's simply an indicator, and that's what we've had in the past. And this has been in place probably since 2013. That's what we've had on the report cards for K6.
Okay, so I'd love to see a sample of a report card for K6. And because what I hear you saying is they still get an A through an F, but underneath language arts or math, they have some standards and they might receive a 1, 2, 3, 4 on their standards so that they would have better knowledge on where they need help or what they are proficient at.
President O'Brien, it's a way for our parents to better understand, hopefully, why the student received a D, a C, an A. But the goal is to ensure that what has been identified on a 4-through-1 scale on any number of standards then is able to compute into a final grade. And that's not what is happening right now. And we're going to get into that when we talk about Power School and the grade book at the next board meeting. But we will provide you some samples.
I appreciate that. I haven't had a kid in school for a few years, so. And I will say I do appreciate the standard-based mindset, and I think that having had a son go, live that has helped me to have a better foundation. I have done my reading, grading from the inside out, as well as teacher clarity. So, and the reason I asked about the consistency across our district is after a conversation with a parent who has an incoming senior at O'Connor and who was very frustrated. He was frustrated, she was frustrated during their junior year. we discussed that standard-based mindset, and they had attended another one of our K-8s, not Stetson Hills, and she had never heard of standard-based mindset. So her learning curve in our conversation, it took us a while to speak some of the same language. And it is important to me that as a district, we do have that consistency. And certainly, I guess, shame on me, I thought we had implemented the standard-based mindset across our school district, because certainly that would, in my opinion, have been a great foundational thing to do, would have helped, in my opinion, implementation to this to the next step where everybody wants to go.
President O'Brien,
yes, ma'am.
I would say, and we can potentially get this information for you, maybe not by this Thursday, but a number of our schools have had the 49 or 50%, and a number of our schools are making that shift for next school year. So it's not like it was just Stetson Hills. There have been multiple schools. It's just not been consistent, and that's what we are working towards, is that consistency.
And that would be wonderful information whenever you are able to provide that. So I have a lot more questions, and I believe they're probably mostly geared towards the next presentation on the 28th. So I will forward them to Dr. Finch. However, in reading this, the piece that stood out to me is the importance of feedback, and that also became very, when Bobby Sarah was talking about what was happening at Union Park, it sounds like that feedback is occurring in a way that students understand what they're trying to achieve. And I think that the rubric, although I've heard it said that it doesn't sound like the rubric is important. However, it is important if that's how you're getting your feedback. And if feedback is what we're trying to give to students so that they understand what standard or progression they need to work more on so that they are proficient or are highly proficient, the rubric seems to be very essential to that. And I am concerned, as Mrs. Reed expressed, that our workload on our teachers has been overwhelming this last couple of years, 2.5 years. And I want us to work smarter, not harder, and have consistency. So the truth is, what sold me on PLCs was that if I had a kid in Stetson Hills in 4th grade, and for some reason I moved to Anthem and they need to go to Canyon Springs or Diamond Canyon, or we needed to go over to Bel Air, that essentially in their classes, they would be within a few days on the same, standards, right? So if I'm in math and we were learning fractions, then we weren't going to be too far off. I wasn't going to be too far behind. I wasn't going to be too far ahead. And that consistency is important to me as a governing board member and a community member. And so the rubric, when I hear you talking about how it sounds like the current plan, and I know you're going to talk more, so if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but I don't want, I realize we have PLC groups, different ones here. They shouldn't all be working to develop their own rubrics in my mind. Just like with our online classes when we had to come on so quickly, you had a group of teachers that worked to teach the 8th grade ELA class so that we had online videos available. We just had a couple of people working on that. Not every 8th grade teacher worked on that. And the rubric should be the same in Algebra 1-2 at every single high school, and it should be the same in every 6th grade class, because that provides us consistency. Now, I realize I don't want to take away every teacher's ability to have some flexibility, but it's important that we marry those in a way that we are working smarter, not harder, and that there is consistency across our schools in Deer Valley. And so I'm going to guess that will be covered next time. And the other thing that I do, because we did live this in my household, and it talks about it in Tom Schimmer's book, is the social contract. Because I do hear our parents and our students who the concern, and for teachers, this goes back to teacher workload, right? They do the teaching, the instruction, they provide practice. Some kids, the difference between my kids was, one could do 5 problems, the other one might have needed 30 problems on that. So there was a difference. However, the kid who comes there and doesn't do anything, yet has that opportunity for reassessment without any kind of responsibility and accountability, it is concerning to me, because I want the kids to all master it, but there has to be some kind of contract and expectation. And if we're covering that next week, that's awesome too, but I want you to know that that's important to me, that it gets, that we do have that. And my last thing, which is how do we're taking behavior out of grades, which I 100% support. But how do we report on behavior? So if that's in 2 weeks, awesome. I will wait for 2 weeks to hear it, but I want you to know what's important for me to hear and next week. So a sample grade book, will that be in 2 weeks too? Yes, Kathy's shaking her head at me. Okay. Then I will stop asking any questions about this, and anybody else has any other questions, we will get them to you, Dr. Finch. And I do want to commend you all on covering a great deal of material very effectively in your short period of time. I do appreciate that very much. And with that, thank you all for being here. I'm hoping the 5 in the front get to go home and get some rest. We're going to continue on with the rest of our public requests, public requests to speak. We have 2 more. Kelly Bazin, if you'll step to the microphone, and then Joanne Gurchi, you will be after. I'm sorry, what? Oh, Garachi, I'm sorry. I don't read so well. I apologize. Is Kelly still here? Okay, I'm so sorry, Kelly, that was a lot. So Joanne, you're up, because Kelly is not with us.
Thank you.
State your name for the record, and then your time will begin.
Okay, my name is Joanne Geraci. I'm here because I don't have any students in the district, but I've worked in education, and I've worked in education back east in Rochester, New York, and here in Phoenix, Arizona. And so I applied to the district, okay? And I was appalled by what I saw for the pay. I was like, wow, okay. And I know this is Arizona, not like New York State, okay. Um, but still, I was kind of shocked. And I called the district office, and I talked to HR, and I said, this isn't really what you pay for the teachers and for paraprofessionals. Because I saw what they pay for the paraprofessionals, and I'm like, are you serious? $14.12? I said, that must be a typo. And they said, no, it's not a typo. And the reason I'm bringing it up is that teachers have so much responsibilities. Paraprofessionals have so much responsibilities. And you're talking about this grading and grading systems. And, teachers have to do more than just grades. I mean, there's a lot of responsibility. And I know I've worked as a teacher as well as in various other aspects. And so, with the amount of work that they have to do, and teachers, it's not just teachers, it's paraprofessionals. They need to work together to help students to learn and not just get good grades, because that is important, but we want them to be learners for life. We want them to go on. I was from Rochester, New York, where the dropout rate was horrible. Okay, students were dropping out like flies. And we want students to be able to go on and be successful and to go to college, but you got to be able to retain teachers with the kind of salaries you have. And when I saw what they pay for the paraprofessionals, they don't take into consideration if you have a degree. They don't take into consideration that you have any experience. I talked to the HR and they said, no, we don't. Our district doesn't do it. And how are you going to retain teachers and get teachers or staff that will stay if you don't have the proper salaries to match it, because they can go to the work in the public sector and make more money, and have less headaches. Not that I'm saying that students are headaches, but I mean, that they can be able to teach them effectively. So basically, that's where I'm trying to explain it so that you can get and keep and retain quality students and have those students to say, yeah, I had that teacher 10 years ago and she's still there and she was the best teacher I ever had because you kept her. She stayed not only because she loved what she does, oops, but
Thank you so much for your comments. Appreciate them. Thank you. We are on item 4A, old business approve grade 7-12 science curriculum.
I recommend that the governing board approve grade 7-12 science curriculum materials adoption as recommended.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is Dr. Galligan, is there anything new?
President O'Brien, there are no changes.
Thank you so much. Are any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. We'll move on to consent agenda now.
I move that the governing board approve consent agenda items 5A through 5T.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay.
I'd like to explain my vote. I'm going to vote nay because for one, there are way too many items in consent agenda, and for transparency purposes, I believe they should be voted on individually. Secondly, I've made it clear I will never vote on any approval of Gus Rosenfeld, and that is one of the items that is mushed in amongst all this information. So my vote is nay.
So you're voting to abstain?
No, nay.
Nay, okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you. That's why I wanted to verify. I apologize. So the motion passes 3-1. For item 6A, I will be turning the meeting over to Mrs. Reed as I will be abstaining.
Okay. Item 6A, approve employee professional development out of state. I recommend that the governing board approve all employee out of state travel per governing board policy GCCE.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I have a question. On this, how are the CTE teachers, how are they determined?
President O'Brien, Ms. Fisher, would you just explain a little bit more?
So one of the major developments here is teachers going for a CTE training so that they can become CTE teachers. I want to phrase it clearly. So how are we selecting, are these individuals, from what I could tell, are not currently in the path of being a CTE teacher? How are we determining what teachers we select? It appeared to me that there was one from each high school. And so how are we selecting those individuals? My teaching cert happens to be CTE. So, and I know that each cert is slightly different.
That's right. Yeah. Do you know more about it? Do you want to talk to it? President O'Brien, Ms. Fisher, this is, it's a grant from WestMec for cadets, so those who are interested in moving into WestMec or CTE programming or, and it's a grant from WestMec that gives us the opportunity to build the capacity of CTE teachers
Correct.
in our
I
district.
understand that portion, because I did read through the materials. My question is, how are these individuals selected? Is there an application process? Is it open all teachers? Is it selected based on, I don't know, lottery, on a draw, on just information provided?
President O'Brien, Ms. Fisher, I'm not an expert in this matter, but I have spoken to Ms. Fitzpatrick regarding portions of this, and my understanding is the grant requirement is that these positions have to be 6/5 positions, and so it was based on the schedule that was available for people that had an interest in the actual teaching this teacher prep program.
Okay, so these are the only 6/5 teachers at the schools.
I would not be able to say that definitively, but my understanding in talking with at least two principals about this, it is driven by the master schedule because the requirement of the grant is it had to be a 6/5 position for this additional program that we did not have prior to the grant.
My concern is that I want to make sure all teachers had an opportunity to apply if they were in that range. Now, at this point, it's already done, but I would like to see a more equitable process, or at least a process, versus, well, I just picked this one because I happen to like him, because it doesn't seem that we have a process. I mean, there's a lot of 6/5 teachers at each of these high schools. So what I'm looking for is just any type of criteria. They're new. This is an area that we need. That's why they're going this direction. They're new. It's marketing. I know at like Deer Valley, we have a marketing teacher who is not originally a teacher. She was in marketing before. I know at Mountain Ridge, we have different. So that's why I'm asking the question. So for this time, I will vote A because it's already done. It's a done deal. But I would like to see a process that is more equitable for all of our teachers versus limited to connected teachers. Thank you.
Sorry, so motion passes 3-0, 1 abstention.
Do you have a motion for action item 6B?
I recommend that the governing board accept the administration's recommendation to pre-approve the addenda as presented.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, item 7.
Hold on one second. Any opposed, say nay. I'm sorry that. The motion passed unanimously. I apologize. And so for item 6C, I move that the governing board approve evaluation and performance pay for the Deer Valley Unified School District Superintendent, Dr. Curtis Finch, at 75% of the 10% of contract amount allowable. Is there a second?
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please say nay.
Just to clarify my vote, my vote is not reflective on Dr. Finch's work. It is more reflective on the goals. And so because I have concerns in that area, I am going to vote nay.
So the motion passes 3-1. Three to one. Okay, item 6D.
I recommend that the governing board accept the administration's the attached rates of pay schedule for the 2022-2023 school year.
Second.
Mr. Miglerino.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, I'm going to do my best effort to try and pinch hit for Ms. Moffett, who's not here. This is a rates of pay schedule that we request that you approve annually so that if we're paying people, it will be with the rates that are approved. I wanted to draw your attention to a couple items that that changed. We did change the administrator per diem from $350 to $400. In my tenure in the district, which is more than 17 years now, I don't think this amount has changed. We looked at an average of our principals. This is basically the substitute pay rate for a principal if we were to bring them in on a non-contracted day, if you will. So that was increased. We also increased the assistant principal per diem to $350. So $400 for a principal, $350 for an assistant principal, and then the dean would be $300. That's consistent or more closely consistent with the averages for those three level of administrators. We also have listed a premium substitute teacher rate of $200. That is for schools that would need special assistance. In this most recent year, that was at Deer Valley Middle School due to the nature of the number of vacancies at that school. And we would use that premium rate going forward into next year. Many of these other rates are calculated based off formulas that are derived, such as class coverage and that. So that's why you see some non-rounded numbers, if you will. Other rates were actually prescribed in the tentative agreement that Ms. Moffett shared before. Of course, some of the rates are in what the board approved in the salary schedules for the upcoming year. And I'd be happy to do my best to try and answer any questions. I'm hoping there aren't any.
Let's think of something.
Oh, I have one. I'm not even, I had one before he said that. So bad news, Mr. Miglerino, but I won't hold it against you if you can't answer it. The, I don't know, it's not addenda pay, the hard to fill amounts that we have. Please remind me where and how we determine those.
President O'Brien, so the hard to fill addenda amounts are prescribed in, I believe, the certified manual. And so we only have hard to fill amounts in the certified manual or for the certified staff. But I believe they're found in the
Okay, thank you. Then we'll see those on June 20, that manual language on June 28th. Wonderful. See, that wasn't so bad.
I didn't say it was accurate.
Oh, Dr. Finch nodded, so you're good. Okay, with that, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. Hearing none, I believe it passed unanimously.
It hasn't popped up.
Yeah, it's kind of being slow today. Thank you. 4-0, confirmed. Okay. With that, we will move on to preview item 7A, the Deer Valley. I'm sorry, what?
It's 12:15 here, so I am going to read along with the rest of the meeting and go to bed maybe.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ordway, for joining us. Appreciate you staying up so late.
Thanks for having me. Everyone have a nice night.
See you next time. All right, Mrs. Ordway has left the meeting. So we will now preview the Deer Valley Education Foundation MOU, and for that, we are going to go to Mr. Miglerino.
President O'Brien, members of the board, Dr. Finch, this is an annual agreement that we have with the Deer Valley Education Foundation. This is a longstanding partnership that we have with the foundation, and working with their executive director, Ms. Murray Brennan, we added the one change this year is that we may provide some incentives for staff recruitment, development, If that's in part due to the fact that the staffing challenges that we're facing, we might want to utilize and leverage their ability to be able to provide more opportunities to be able to recruit, develop, and retain our human capital. So that's the one change. It is an annual agreement, longstanding agreement that we've had and benefited from over many years. Other minor changes in it are basically just to accommodate for changes in how the program is operationally handled throughout the year. And I'd be happy to answer any question. This is not an action item. It's just a preview. We will bring it back for formal consideration at the June 28th board meeting.
Any questions? Seeing and hearing none, we will move on to our next item, which is to preview the fiscal year 23 expenditure budget. And that looks like we're going to go to Mrs. Mock for that.
President O'Brien, members of the board, those who are left here with us in the boardroom and those online. Excited to be the bookends to the meeting tonight, having started with our fiscal year 22 M&O report and ending with the preview of our 22-23 expenditure budget. Calling it a preview is a bit of a misnomer because we've actually been working on this budget since the beginning of the school year. We have had input from our negotiated solutions team, which starts in September of each year, meeting with them monthly to discuss the current state of the district and potential increases in the current year and ongoing to the next year. We start in November with our district budget committee and develop our district budget priorities to help us frame our decisions for establishing the budget for the coming year. And when needed and when requested, we have governing board study or executive sessions. We did not happen to have any of those for the current budget or in the most recent years. Our proposed budget is what we're looking at, just a preview of our expenditure budget. We've got 2 additional meetings where we will present the budget for action for the governing board. Our next one is on June 28th, in which time we will ask you to approve the budget to be advertised so that our public can see the budget in true transparency before it is adopted on July 12th. Now, as you know, the new school year starts on July 1st, technically, is when we celebrate our school new year. But it is statutorily, we do have to approve our budget by July 15th. Our budget is adopted on proposed enrollment counts for the coming school year and has been for a couple of years. We wanted to preview or remind you of the budget priorities that were established and recommended by the budget committee back in February. And we will point out ways that we are able to, through decisions that the governing board has already made, direct some of our additional resources this year towards these priorities, which include, by far and away, the number one budget priority from the majority of our stakeholders this year, which was funding competitive salaries and benefit package for the retention of all existing staff. They also recommended developing a committee to explore opportunities to re-engage and retain our employees, evidence the value of employees, and make employment at DVUSD desirable for new applicants as well. Next was to ensure and maintain all virtual and physical safety aspects throughout the district, maintain and expand or reinstate special programs for students. This could be curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular. And to support the volunteer work team as they continue to study the impact of the adult-to-student ratio in learning. Some highlights of our proposed budget factors. We continue to have an M&O override thanks to our voters of 15% over our revenue control limit. This allows us to spend more than the low limits that the state allows us for establishing our budget limits. We are going to, or expect to receive, a 2% inflationary increase added to our M&O or base support level for the next school year. We think it's incredibly important to point out at this time that inflation for the state is much higher than 2%. But in accordance with Arizona Revised Statute 15901.01, schools are funded at either 2% or either the inflation or GDP price deflator or 2%, whichever's less. So I think everyone who's still here watching or who may watch this in the future knows by pulling up to the gas pump or the grocery store that inflation is a little bit more than 2%, which is one of the reasons that it does make it more difficult for us to provide those competitive salaries and packages, is that school districts just are not funded at the same rate and level that everything else increases across the state. As mentioned previously, we are in current year funding. We are projecting a 1% increase of our student enrollment compared to our student enrollment from the 100th day this year. We are pleased to say that our Teacher Experience Index, or our TEI, based on our years of service of our teachers in Deer Valley, compared to the average years of service across the state, increased from our 1.009 last year to 1.0061. We basically are back to where we were in FY21. FY22 was a bit of an anomaly for us for that decrease. That hasn't happened in many years. I'd like to thank our HR department for the work that they do to report those years of experience and make sure that they are recorded accurately for our staff. As stated earlier in the meeting, we do expect our M&O carry forward to be projected at just over $22 million. We will not know that for sure actually until September. So once that number is finalized, we will see that in future budget revisions. Our budget is an ongoing process. It continually is developed and changed based on processes that we have across the district, collaborative processes, as we said, with our negotiated solution team, with our governing board and other stakeholders. Several years ago, I think we were about 4 years ago, we did use some available funds to establish our school opening fund. That was $915,000. That fund, we have 5 years from the date of placing those funds into that fund to use it. And so we are going to use it in 22-23 to help us offset the cost of opening Elementary 32 or Inspiration Mountain. Other highlights, some of the items in our budget building that are formulated include our staffing ratios. Those are based on staffing ratios from our certified manual as well. Our district additional assistance capital, we are happy to say, continues to be fully funded. And this school year that we are in currently was the first time in 13 years that it was not reduced by the state. We are excited to be able to infuse additional capital or district additional assistance back into our schools and to meet some long overdue needs that we have had from those cuts. And we'll take a look at those a little bit more specifically in another slide. We do continue to use our cash accounts to help us to infuse to our budget and give us a little bit of additional spending capacity. We are increasing our overall use of our cash, our 5 cash accounts to $4.2 million for 22-23. This includes 3.94 of what we call the 5 cash accounts, our athletic participation fees of $300,000 and parking fees of $100,000. And actually, I think that slide needed to be updated. If you'll look here, I think parking fees are, and if you see the 1.37 million in the cash accounts as the increase, not the parking fees, but the athletic participation fee, we typically expect about $300,000 that we can infuse into our budget for the staffing that we provide for the security officers in our parking lots. And, you know what? I echo Mrs. Ordway's thoughts that it's really late. It's obviously not as late for us, but let me say this correctly. We've got the athletic participation fee that we use for our coaching addenda. We help infuse that into our coaching addenda that we allocate to the schools. And so due to a decrease in that in this current year, we're going to infuse just a little bit less in our budget next year to make sure that we've got enough to cover those expenses. District additional assistance, we're going to see a $452,000 increase based on our current projected enrollment. Going to see a significant increase of $2 million to our M&O override. But our main increases are coming from our increase in students, the increase to the base support level or that per student amount. So overall, it's going to be an increase of, I don't have that slide up, an increase, I think it was around $7 million. But we do have a slight decrease in our budget, and that is in our ESSER funding. For our current year, we were using about $15 million of ESSER 2 funds to offset our M&O expenses. We're going to be able to decrease that significantly next year, but we will still use a little bit of our ESSER 3 funds. We still have 2 more years to use our ESSER 3 funds, and that is our Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund, which was part of our COVID relief, many of the grants that we received. Last year, when we built our budget, we had in there a $4.9 million budget adjustment from the prior year due to our distance learning reconciliation. Those were just because we are constantly building our budget, and there are processes that overlap from year to year, even for the current year budget, if that makes any sense, that sometimes it does take, the budget adjustment doesn't come until June or July for the current school year or the prior school year, and so we make up those differences in the current year budget. And that's what we saw with the budget adjustments for our 21 distance learning reconciliation. So that's included as a decrease just because we're not going to have that infused into our budget this year. Here's what it looks like laid out. This is typically what we see on the first page of what we call the budget, or formerly called the Gold Book. You can see all of those same amounts broken out in a linear fashion. Overall, we're projecting a budget limit of just about $267.5 million. Some of the increases to our budget include what the board has already approved, and that was our $12 million salary increase, including 6% overall salary increase for certified, other professional staff, and classified staff, a 5% salary increase for admin exempt, and just over $1 million to help with classified salary compression. As we said, we do have those increased to staff for Inspiration Mountain, 33.5 certified staff, 15.5 FTE for classified. And in addition to those, due to the growth that we are projecting, we do have 5.0 FTE increase for certified and 14.6 for classified. All of those that we mentioned previously are based on formula or processes that occur before we reach this point today. This slide for these $377,000, and we actually believe it's going to be slightly less than this, are for district office staff, which any of the increases to district office staff specifically are not formulated. And that's why they are broken out here separately compared to the other staffing that you saw on the prior page. And we've got approximately $33,000 in district reclassifications that we are presenting, at $344,000 in new M&O funded positions, and about $457,000 in special education staffing that we list here because they would be added FTE at the district office, but they would not be M&O funded. So we expect to take our Medicaid and public schools open care funds, which is the extension of Medicaid to non-special ed students that we're beginning billing for this year, and expect to grow that program significantly next year as well. These positions are also affectionately known as the Futures positions. We've seen the Futures report at prior board meetings, and this would be, I think, really the first phase of infusing some of those recommended positions into our staffing. Non-staffing changes to the budget include, happily, a decrease to the state retirement rate from 12.41% to 12.17%. We are expecting an increase in utilities, specifically electricity, mostly due to Elementary 32 of about $250,000. Due to inflation, we do have some increase to other budgets as well. Our AIA dues, graduation, continue to increase slightly each year due to inflation. And we will see increase to our safe schools. We have intergovernmental agreements with the City of Glendale for a couple of our schools, and safety grants for a couple of for at least one high school. 2 of our high schools do not benefit from any of those, but all of those programs are seeing an increase to the cost of security officers, specifically through the police force. As we mentioned earlier in the M&O report from the current year, transportation is seeing marked increase in cost, specifically due to the cost of fuel. And that is for unleaded and, of course, the diesel fuel that our bus fleet runs off of as well. Our maintenance and grounds department also seeing an increase in their costs. Both of these departments, of course, support all of our schools, and so any of the increase in their budget actually goes directly to the benefit of the schools, even if it's housed at the district level. We are also going to, or requesting an increase to our school discretionary budgets, as long as kind of on the line that Mr. Migliorino was talking about with the salaries earlier for the admin rate of pay. With the school discretionary budgets, since I've been working with those 2016 and prior, we've not seen an increase to those amounts. And due to inflation, I think our schools will also see an increase to some of their costs, including any extra time or overtime that they pay out of their budgets or even their custodial supplies. So we're increasing those by about 10%. We do have an increase to our International Baccalaureate program at Berry Goldwater High School and Norterra Canyon. That is more of a procedure. It's the budget had not caught up with the expenses in a couple of years. So the expenses are already greater than what we have in the budget, and so that item is just reconciling those two things. Seen a significant increase over the past couple of years to our property and liability insurance. As far as inflation goes, that's probably one of the greatest items that we are seeing. We had an increase in the current year and need to increase that contribution for 22-23 as well. Thanks to the return of district additional assistance into our capital budget, we are able to establish our capital budget from our district additional assistance at $12 million in 20, which is $1 million more than it was. We kept $11 million of that district additional assistance in capital this year. Speaking of that graph that I was talked about a couple slides ago, this is the historical cuts that we saw from, and actually it goes back before 2013-14, but that's just where we're starting the graph here. Cumulatively, since 2008, we have seen over $115 million reduction in our capital. Years that we were not able to have any new capital budget, basically. And we are so excited that the legislature made that change and that we are given that full district additional assistance with no cuts now. Hopefully then, since we are keeping 12 million versus 11 million in our capital budget, once we distribute that, the schools will see an increase in that as well. And I think our curriculum adoptions that went for years without curriculum adoptions, Dr. Gallagher and her team are able to continue to move forward and keep that curriculum up to date. So what does all of that mean for our community or our taxpayers? We did see an increase in our nest asset valuation for the district of about 5.3% and a decrease to the qualifying tax rate from 3.53 to about 3.42, as you see here on the screen. As a reminder, we used to, or the state used to consider any cash that we had on hand as part of our tax rate calculation. That has been removed from the calculation, and we are about to show you a projection based off of the formula that's used at the county superintendent's office. But as a reminder, they actually established that based off of the budget that we adopt. But based off of what we presented here in the slides earlier, the projections we are expecting for our tax rate is the primary tax rate for taxpayers in Deer Valley Unified School District decreasing over 6% or over 23 cents to about 3.5299, and our secondary rate increasing slightly on a lower level at only 0.6273% or 0.01 to 23099. The net impact, assuming an average residential parcel, it's getting late enough I can't talk. Assuming an assessed value of a residential parcel, residential parcel being about $311,000, that would be a slight increase on average of $33.24 or 2.6%. And really that's not due to, that's due to the increase in the net assessed valuation obviously not the slight decrease overall of our projected tax rate. We are going to ask the governing board to approve adjacent ways funding for us for 22-23. Last year, the governing board did approve $900,000 in adjacent ways, which is a direct tax to our taxpayers. And that cost was $2.57 per $100,000 of a residence. This year, we do have a project that's already authorized in our current 2019 bond for some upgrades to our Northern Services Center. And so the $500,000 that we are projecting this time would be a decrease from that 2.57 to 1.54 per $100,000, and that will be for the safe ingress and egress of that Northern Services Center. Next steps after tonight, we will bring the budget back, including the budget book, the budget forms for the governing board to approve to be advertised. We will advertise the budget and the adjacent ways at least 10 days prior to the public hearing and adoption, which is scheduled for July 12th. And due to the lateness of the legislature finishing their session and approving a budget this year, which has not happened yet, we will be adopting this budget on preliminary forms. So we will be required to have our first budget revision, which we expect on September 13th. And potential other budget revisions could be December, and then our final budget revision in May of 23. And with that, if I have any questions or comments.
Any questions, board members? Thank you, Mrs. Mock, for that very thorough and rather quick report, given all the information you had to provide. So at this time, we will go to governing board reports. Mrs. Fisher?
Just a second. I don't have a lot to report other than I did go to the Summer Leadership Conference, and I do have some things to provide to various individuals in the district. One of the things that's really funny is I'm asked on a regular basis why I continue to attend ASBA, considering how many of our parents have communicated with me that they're concerned with the push towards a liberal biased agenda. And the answer is real simple, and I'm stating it here for the public who are watching or will watch. The reality is that the Arizona School Boards Association does impact our education system. And if only one side attends and the other refuses to attend or stays silent when they're there, then we just get skewed further and further to one direction. Even though school districts are supposed to be not political one direction or the other, it's becoming clearer and clearer that there is a distinct division and a distinct direction of public education. And what comes down to is if you're not in it, you can't help it, you can't improve it, and you can't correct it. So that's the reason I continue to attend. Anyways, to that point, at least 50% of this conference was highly beneficial. It had a few that, in my opinion, were extremely left-leaning, and I found that very concerning, especially because I had a lot of conservative individuals come to me afterwards and say, we feel like you do, but we don't feel we can speak up. And so that is there, but the areas that were very beneficial, and I would hope, number one, kudos to Deer Valley on how well that our staff are working with the various agencies for our homeless kids or our kids who are in foster care. Because I will tell you that the individuals who came to speak on those topics were very, very complimentary to our district and to the individuals that work with them. They were very not obviously not during their lecture, but I did spend some time with them afterwards. They were not only complimentary of the work that our district does in this area, but they were also very informative. I don't think a lot of people realize that we have, I believe she said 16 centers of, not all foster kids have a home. Some of them live in a housing center. We have 16 of them, is I believe the number she gave me. And it's very impressive that our staff is working with them. But I would really appreciate if we had some kind of information, maybe just a simple report so that our public is aware. I think about my kids, and I have a giant file cabinet at my home in my office that has all of my stuff. But in it, the second drawer down, is pens, pencils, notebooks, sticky pads, various types of poster board that they can do stuff with, or and whatnot. And one of the things that they made a point to say is, when a teacher gives an assignment and that requires a poster board, who does the foster kid go ask for that poster board? And I'd never given that thought. And in that moment, I felt so heartless because, my kid, I've always sent in supplies. I've always given supplies to my neighbor kids if they needed them. Everybody knows where the drawer is. They know they're free to walk in my office and take supplies. But thinking about those kids, that was highly impressive. That our district is considering it, but highly, I don't know, I guess disturbing that how unaware I was, because I think I consider myself aware of things, but I was just a little bit disappointed in myself that I hadn't given thought to those things of that nature. And there was a lot of other things that they came up with. So I just think that would be a really good topic so that our public is aware. I know we do a lot of outreach and whatnot, but sometimes it's not a matter of the district doing the big outreach or the district doing certain things. Sometimes it's just recognizing that your neighborhood kid or your neighbor needs that help. So that was very meaningful. There is a program that allows students to monitor kind of their own emotional state. It is free to districts to implement and to use. I did bring a flyer for you. I found it very impressive. Something to look at. It's no cost to us, but I think it does take some of the subjective away because the kids saying how they're feeling on their own. It links into our systems. It is very good at being able to pull out the data. And there is some information about students who have actually been saved because it showed how depressed they were. It allowed the adults in their lives to kind of step in and help them. They did note at least one student who was on the verge of suicide. And just by seeing what was in this program, they kind of were like, "Wow, we need to check this kid." So that was very helpful. I'll provide it to the district and can look into it. I do think it would be very good. One of the speakers was also a 2-day speaker, and I was kind of I laughed because well, the written word is just funny. You can't put a gesture in a written word. I mean, sometimes you can if you're really, really flary with your writing, you can. But the speaker mentioned that he does not ever email with anybody. If he can't have a face-to-face discussion with them, he doesn't email because the message doesn't come clear. And I actually text Sheila, "Are you still here?" when that one was said, because he's right. There's so many times that we miss the mark, and I just think that would be something that would be beneficial for us to consider. Some of the leadership aspects. A leader, there's a lot of leaders. There's people who are leaders based on their position, and there's people that are leaders just because it's their nature. And then there's people who don't even think they're leaders, but they're leaders because there's people following them. And I just think it's really important for us to realize that there's leadership qualities in everyone. But when you are in a position, you need to somewhat find a way to work together, especially if you are multiple people with strong personalities. Sometimes the best leaders will shred each other, basically, because it's like bulls in a china shop. And so I found his, a lot of his was very informative as well. So that's kind of the conference in a nutshell, why it was valuable, what it brought forward. I will leave with Sheila the information that I brought back for whomever. Also, the toolkit for the foster care education, because I just thought the toolkit was really cool. You guys probably already have it, probably have already seen it, but I couldn't answer some of the questions, and I just thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was a good item. The only other thing I wanted to mention is politics, not mine. But as we get closer to the July date where individuals are going to turn in their signatures for the Deer Valley School Board, I really hope we do not have another forum. I've found those forums that we have here generally are geared or skewed, which is why I attended one and never attended one again. But I would hope that we would just be able to, at some point, put simple page, these are the candidates, this is their name, contact information, that's it, nothing else. And then just let the public look into them. It's unfortunate. I kind of watch, and over the years, I have had some of the most horrible things created about me, and everybody who actually knows me looks at it and goes, oh, that is so not you. I don't care. I take it. It's come, whatever, it is what it is. But that's already occurring. We have parents doing that same thing to other parents. And at this point, we have a group that is doing that to candidates. I think we just need to keep our hands somewhat clear. I mean, if you support an individual privately, cool, go ahead, do it. But every single election has had some element of it's pushed and it's skewed a certain direction. And I really hope that we don't do that. And I hope we don't perpetuate incorrect information. Some of the most horrible things that have been shared about me were shared by district staff, district administration. And it is what it is, but it's not factual. And it's damaging. It's damaging not only to me, but to my family. But when these people aren't even elected yet, and we're already doing it to them, it's damaging. It's terrible. And I don't think it's who we are, or at least it's not who we should be. So that's my take on that. All the other elections, Lord, God help us all. Both sides have gone crazy, and is what it is. I do hope you guys are having a good summer, and I hope the summer work is going good. I have heard from some teachers positives of what they're doing. And so I do like when I hear the positives, because there's way too much negative that comes. And so that's it.
Mrs. Reed?
Thank you. Today is Flag Day, National Flag Day, and I had the really cool opportunity to hold a Flag Day ceremony, a flag raising ceremony at work. And we had a Boy Scout troop from Anthem, which was made up of the majority of students who came and performed the flag ceremony for us. And one of our teachers actually sang the national anthem. So it was really neat to have the community support and the support from DVUSD students and teachers and staff that were there. So that was really a unique opportunity and just something that I'm super thankful about, that we have businesses who love on our students and our teachers and our schools. And when the opportunity comes back for our schools to step in and help businesses, that partnership is there. So that was a cool opportunity today. We had a parent email that I think that came in yesterday or the day before. She brought up a good point and asked about if we had a ceremony similar to Pursuing Victory with Honor for our athletic department as we do for our fine arts. And we don't. And I think that's an opportunity for the district to provide some equity, that if our fine arts departments win huge awards every year and they get recognized nationally. We have a music director who's being recognized nationally right now. And so it would be really great to show that equity to them. And also to our CTE program, because we're really proud of our CTE program as well, and they win national awards. It'd be really great to pull those students together along with their family and provide them the same opportunities we do with athletics. I think that as we're looking at students and we want to produce lifelong learners, it's important to meet them where they are interested in excelling and let them know that we're all very proud of them, even if they don't play sports. To go along with what Mrs. Fisher said, yeah, politics suck during an election time. And I remember when I was running and after I won that there was somebody who posted some really nasty things about me on social media and about my kids. So yeah, it's not fun when you are running for office. And unfortunately, that just apparently is the way that we play politics now, is that, you know, your 8-year-old and your 10-year-old and your 14-year-old and your 19-year-old become fair game that we can attack. So I know that very well. So thanks for bringing that point up, Mrs. Fisher. And I hope that everybody continues to have a wonderful summer. And thank you for all of you who've been putting on continuing education opportunities for our teachers and all of our teachers who have showed up to do those. I know that summers are not time off. It's not vacation time for the majority of our staff and our teachers. They're still working and they're still planning and looking at new curriculum that the district has adopted. So thank you for all of your hard work during your summer break.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Thank you, Mrs. Reed. I will keep this short and sweet and say that thank you also to all the staff who are working hard this summer, whether they are working on the new curriculum or working on our Jumpstart programs, our summer programs, or continuing our community ed programs, and all those in district office who work year round. So thank you for all that continued work, because it's necessary to keep us going. I do hope everybody does get a chance, though, to do some summer relaxing and taking care of themselves as we prepare for our new school year. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Finch for his superintendent's report.
Well, mine will be short as well. I will continue to try to keep you in the loop on the legislature and what they're up to. As Ms. Mock alluded, it may go up to the finish line. It might even cross the finish line. We shall see. Might have to go backwards in time, back to the future. And if you have any questions related to that or you want to know the latest, feel free to give me a call. I do put it pretty much every time in the latest of the latest. And we just even had some activity today as well, so I'll include that on Thursday. Probably as the person that spoke at the microphone, yes, she doesn't know that we're 49th in the nation. She comes from a state that's number one, I believe. New York is number one for supporting public ed. So welcome to Arizona. We have cactus and we're low funded by the legislature. So we have sunshine, though. They don't. They have rain and snow and sleet and lots of people. But we love it here in AZ. I do have one award to brag about because that lady's sitting in here. I included it in my last update, but I think we're going to give some recognition down the road as well. But Miss Monica's team, Monica Allred, received a copper medallion for Arizona, top ranking. Yay. For a program that she did, well, she submitted it to the same program with a little more pizzazz, maybe took it up one more notch, submitted it with 90 other school districts in the nation. 4 were chosen, only 4 were chosen this year. And yes, Deer Valley received a gold medallion from the National Public School Relations Committee. So now her goal is going to be like 1 million kids, because her goal was around kids that she was working on. So just congratulations to her team. And there were some awards that I also missed that I'll put in the Thursday update. We keep winning awards even into the summer. So thanks again to my team that continues to work during summertime, getting her done, getting us ready for next year as we plan. And our staff is out there running jump starts and summer camps and all that fun stuff as well. So thanks to everyone who's putting in the OT to get it done.
Okay,
Thanks.
congratulations, Monica and communications team. That's incredible. With that, at 9:56, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Second? All those in favor, say aye, and no nays. And if you voted nay, you can stay.